The rain came down like bullets against the wooden shutters, and Rose Vaughn stood shivering on the front porch of her family's house, her fists pounding against the door that her father had just bolted from the inside. Through the howling wind, she could still hear her stepmother's shrill voice inside, calling her a disgrace, a burden, and words far worse that cut deeper than the icy rain now soaking through her thin cotton dress. It was April of 1883 in Deeming, New Mexico, and while the desert town rarely saw such storms, tonight the heavens had opened with a fury that matched the rage in her stepmother's heart. Rose had turned 21 just 3 days ago, old enough to know that her stepmother had been looking for any excuse to cast her out since marrying her father 2 years prior. The excuse had come tonight in the form of Rose refusing to marry Chester Whitmore, a wealthy cattle rancher 30 years her senior, who had offered her father a substantial sum for her hand. Rose had looked into Chester's cold gray eyes at dinner and seen nothing but possession and cruelty. And when he had grabbed her wrist too tightly, while insisting she would make a fine wife, she had thrown her water in his face and told him she would rather die an old maid than spend a single day as his property. Her father, weak-willed and desperate to please his new wife, had stood silent as her stepmother had dragged Rose to the door and shoved her out into the storm. Rose's 2 younger half-brothers had watched from the stairs with wide eyes but said nothing. The door had slammed, the bolt had scraped into place, and Rose had been left with nothing but the clothes on her back and the silver locket around her neck that had belonged to her late mother. Lightning split the sky as Rose stumbled down the porch steps, her dark hair plastered to her face and her boots already filling with water. The main street of Deeming was nothing but mud and rushing water now, the storefronts dark and shuttered against the storm. She had nowhere to go. Her aunt lived in Silver City, more than 50 miles away, and she would never survive the journey in this weather. The church was locked at night, and the boarding house would not let her in without payment she did not possess. Rose wrapped her arms around herself and pushed forward, not sure where she was going but knowing she could not stand still. The cold was already seeping into her bones, and her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue. She passed the general store, the saloon, the blacksmith shop, all dark and empty. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land dotted with small ranches and homesteads, Rose's legs began to give out. She sank to her knees in the mud, her vision blurring with rain and tears. She was going to die out here. The thought came to her with strange clarity. She would catch pneumonia and die in the mud like a stray dog, and her father would bury her quietly, and her stepmother would celebrate. Rose wanted to be angry, wanted to rage against the injustice of it all, but she was so cold and so tired that all she felt was a deep, aching sadness. Then, through the sheets of rain, she saw a light. Just a small golden glow in the distance, warm and steady against the storm. Rose forced herself to her feet and stumbled toward it, falling twice more before she reached the source. It was a modest ranch house, well kept but simple, with a barn nearby and a corral that was currently empty. Smoke rose from the chimney, and that golden light spilled from the windows, promising warmth and shelter. Rose dragged herself up the 3 steps to the porch and collapsed against the door, her fist barely making a sound as she tried to knock. She tried again, harder this time, and then everything went dark. When Rose opened her eyes, she was lying on a braided rug in front of a roaring fire, wrapped in what felt like half a dozen blankets. For a confused moment, she thought she had died and gone to heaven. But then she became aware of her soaking wet dress being uncomfortably bunched beneath the blankets, and the sound of footsteps moving around nearby. "Easy now," a deep voice said, and Rose turned her head to see a man crouching beside her. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark brown hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. He had the weathered tan of someone who spent his days in the sun, and the kind of strong, capable hands that came from years of hard work. His face was concerned but kind, and when their eyes met, Rose felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold. "You gave me a scare, miss," he said, his voice soft despite its deep timbre. "Found you passed out on my porch, thought you might be dead at first." Rose tried to speak, but her teeth were still chattering too hard. The man, seeing this, disappeared for a moment and returned with a tin cup filled with something hot that smelled of herbs and honey. He helped her sit up enough to drink, supporting her shoulders with one strong arm while holding the cup to her lips with his other hand. The liquid burned going down, but it was a good burn, warming her from the inside. Rose drank half the cup before she found her voice. "Thank you," she managed, her voice hoarse and weak. "I am sorry to intrude." "No intrusion when someone is dying on your doorstep," the man said, taking the cup back. "I am James Mallory. This is my ranch. Small operation, just me and my horses mostly, but it is home." "Rose Vaughn," she whispered. And then, because she was still cold and frightened and the kindness in his eyes was almost too much to bear, she started to cry. James did not tell her to stop or ask foolish questions. He simply sat beside her and let her cry, occasionally adding another log to the fire or adjusting the blankets around her shoulders. When the tears finally subsided into hiccuping gasps, he handed her a handkerchief and waited. "My family," Rose said finally, the words tumbling out in a rush. "My stepmother locked me out. I refused to marry a man she and my father chose, and she called me ungrateful and disobedient, and she pushed me out into the storm. My father just stood there. He did not even try to stop her." James's jaw tightened, the only sign of the anger Rose saw flash briefly in his eyes. "No one deserves that," he said quietly. "Family is supposed to protect you, not throw you to the wolves." "I have nowhere to go," Rose admitted, fresh tears threatening. "No money, no friends in town who would dare cross my stepmother. She has made sure of that over the past 2 years." "Then you will stay here," James said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "At least until the storm passes and you are well enough to decide what you want to do next. I have a spare room you can use. It is not much, but it is warm and dry." Rose stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You do not know me. I could be anyone. I could be trouble." "Could be," James agreed, a hint of a smile touching his lips for the first time. "But somehow I do not think you are, and even if you were, I could not turn anyone away in a storm like this. Would not be right." There was something about the way he said it, so matter-of-fact and decent, that made Rose's heart squeeze. She had known men like Chester Whitmore, men who saw women as property or objects to be used. She had known men like her father, too weak to stand up for what was right. But this man, this James Mallory who had opened his door to a stranger in a storm, seemed to be something different entirely. "I do not know how to repay you," Rose said softly. "Do not worry about that now," James replied. "Let us just get you properly warmed up and dried off. Storm does not look like it is letting up any time soon." He stood and moved to a chest against the wall, pulling out what looked like a worn flannel shirt and some woolen socks. "These will be big on you, but they are dry and warm. I will step outside while you change. Take your time." Rose watched him go, pulling on a coat before stepping out onto the covered porch where the rain still pounded, but at least he would be somewhat sheltered. The simple consideration of her privacy and dignity, after the way her family had treated her, was almost overwhelming. With shaking hands, Rose shed her wet dress and undergarments, laying them carefully near the fire to dry. The flannel shirt fell to her knees and the sleeves had to be rolled up several times, but it was soft and warm and smelled faintly of wood smoke and sage. She pulled on the thick socks and wrapped one of the blankets around herself like a shawl before calling out that it was safe to return. James came back in, brushing water from his hair. "Better?" he asked. "Much," Rose said and meant it. She was still cold and exhausted, but at least she was no longer in danger of freezing to death. "You are very kind." "Just decent," James corrected, moving to the small kitchen area to stoke the wood stove there. "My mother raised me to help those in need. She would tan my hide if she knew I even considered turning someone away." "Does she live nearby?" Rose asked, curious about this man who had saved her life. "She passed on about 5 years back," James said, his voice gentle with old grief. "Fever took her one winter. My father went a year later. Some say it was his heart, but I think he just missed her too much to want to stay." "I am sorry," Rose said, and she was. Her own mother had died when she was 16, and she still felt the absence like a constant ache. "Thank you," James said. He finished with the stove and pulled out a pot, filling it with water from a pitcher. "I am going to make some stew. Nothing fancy, but it will warm you up from the inside. Meanwhile, you should rest. That room there," he pointed to a door on the far side of the main room, "is yours for as long as you need it. Clean sheets on the bed and everything." Rose started to protest that she could help, but another wave of exhaustion hit her, and she realized she could barely keep her eyes open. "Thank you," she said again, feeling like the words were inadequate but not knowing what else to say. "You are welcome," James replied, already focused on his cooking. "Now go rest before you fall over." Rose made her way to the small bedroom, finding it simple but clean with a narrow bed covered in a thick quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. She crawled under the quilt and was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. She woke to the smell of food and the sound of rain still drumming on the roof, though it seemed less violent than before. Through the small window, she could see that it was still dark outside. Rose sat up slowly, her body aching but no longer feeling like ice. Her head was clearer too, and with clarity came the full weight of what had happened. She had been cast out by her own family. She had no home, no money, no prospects. By tomorrow, the whole town would know what had happened, and her stepmother would have spun some tale that made Rose out to be the villain. No respectable family would take her in, no business would hire her. She was ruined. The panic must have shown on her face when she emerged from the bedroom, because James immediately set down his spoon and came over to her. "Hey now," he said gently. "Whatever you are thinking, it can wait until morning. Right now, you need to eat." He guided her to the simple wooden table and set a bowl of stew in front of her. It was thick with vegetables and bits of beef, seasoned with herbs that made her mouth water. Rose picked up the spoon and took a bite, and it was so good that she nearly cried again. When had she last eaten? Breakfast that morning, before Chester Whitmore had arrived and her world had fallen apart. James sat across from her with his own bowl, eating without watching her too obviously, which she appreciated. The silence was comfortable rather than awkward, broken only by the sound of spoons against bowls and the ever-present rain. "Storm is supposed to clear by morning," James said after a while. "I heard in town yesterday that this system was blowing through fast. Good news for the ranchers, we needed the rain. Bad timing for you, though." "Yes," Rose agreed quietly. She finished her stew and set down her spoon. "I should leave in the morning. I have imposed on you enough." "And go where?" James asked, not unkindly. "You said yourself you have nowhere to go." "I will figure something out," Rose said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Perhaps I can find work somewhere. I can read and write, I can sew, I can cook. Surely someone will hire me. James looked at her steadily across the table. Rose, I do not mean to be harsh, but you need to be realistic. Your stepmother will have told everyone in town some version of tonight by morning. Whether she tells the truth or makes up lies, the result will be the same. You will be marked as a woman without family protection. And in a town like Deeming, that makes you vulnerable. Businesses will not want the trouble of hiring you, and the kind of men who will offer you help might not have honorable intentions. Rose felt her cheeks flush with anger and shame because she knew he was right. So what do you suggest I do? I cannot simply hide here forever. I will not be a burden to you. You are not a burden, James said firmly, and I am not suggesting you hide. I am suggesting you stay here and work for me. I could use the help around the ranch, truth be told. The house could use a woman's touch, and I am a terrible cook. I can pay you fair wages, provide room and board, and give you time to figure out your next step without being desperate. Rose stared at him. You would do that. Let me stay and work for you, but what will people say? A single woman living with a single man. People will talk no matter what you do, James pointed out. At least this way you will be safe and fed while they gossip. And if it truly bothers you, we can make sure we are never alone in a way that seems improper. I have ranch hands who come by during the day sometimes, and you could attend church on Sundays to show you are respectable. It was a practical solution, Rose had to admit. And yet there was something in the way James was looking at her, something warm and almost protective, that made her pulse quicken. She barely knew this man, and yet he had shown her more kindness in a few hours than her own family had in years. Why are you helping me? She asked softly. You do not owe me anything. James was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his words carefully. When I was 19, my father got injured in a horse accident, broke his leg bad and could not work for months. We were going to lose the ranch, lose everything. A neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, came by and offered to help. He paid our debts, helped work the land, did not ask for anything in return. When my father asked him why, Mr. Henderson said that we are all just passing through this life, and the only thing that matters is whether we helped each other along the way. James met her eyes. Mr. Henderson is gone now, passed on about 3 years back. But I think about what he said all the time. Maybe this is my chance to help someone the way he helped us. Rose felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were different. Not tears of fear or sadness, but something else. Something that felt almost like hope. Then I accept, she said. I will stay and work for you, at least for a while, and I promise I will earn my keep. I do not doubt it, James said, and he smiled at her. A real smile that reached his eyes and made her heart do a strange little flip in her chest. The storm did break by morning, leaving the desert landscape washed clean and sparkling under a brilliant blue sky. Rose woke to sunshine streaming through the small window and the sound of birds singing. For a confused moment, she forgot where she was, and then it all came rushing back. She was at James Mallory's ranch. She had been cast out by her family. Her life had changed completely in the span of one night. Rose dressed in her own clothes, which had dried by the fire, though they were wrinkled and still bore mud stains. She would need to wash them properly and see about getting more clothes somehow. Perhaps she could sew herself some new dresses from fabric once she earned a bit of money. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found James already up and dressed, standing at the stove making coffee. He turned when he heard her and nodded a greeting. Morning. Sleep well. Better than I expected, Rose admitted. Thank you again for everything. Stop thanking me, James said, but his tone was gentle. You are going to be working here now, remember. No need for constant gratitude between employer and employee. The word employee felt strange, but also oddly liberating. Rose had never had a job before, had always been expected to simply marry well and become some man's wife. The idea that she could earn her own money, have her own purpose beyond marriage, was both frightening and exciting. "What would you like me to do first?" she asked. James poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to her. "First, we are going to have breakfast. Then I will show you around the property, and we can figure out a routine that works for both of us. I have to ride out to check on some of my horses that are in the far pasture, but I should be back by noon. You can spend the morning getting settled in and maybe tidying up the house a bit." "I am afraid I am not the neatest person." Rose looked around the main room and had to hide a smile. James was clearly a bachelor who lived alone. There were boots by the door caked in dried mud, dishes piled in the wash basin, and dust coating most of the surfaces. It was not filthy, exactly, but it definitely needed a woman's touch, as he had said. They ate a simple breakfast of eggs and bread, and then James took her outside to show her the property. The ranch was about 40 acres, he explained, mostly used for raising and training horses. He had about 20 head currently, a mix of Mustangs he had captured and broken himself, and a few thoroughbreds he was training for wealthy buyers in Silver City and Las Cruces. "I am not a cattle rancher," James said as they walked toward the barn. "Never had the interest or the stomach for it, honestly. But horses, now horses I understand. They are smart and loyal if you treat them right, and there is always good money in a well-trained horse." Rose watched him as he spoke, seeing the passion light up his face. He moved with easy confidence around the animals, and they clearly trusted him. A beautiful chestnut mare came up to the fence and nuzzled his hand, and James laughed and produced an apple from his pocket. "This is Willow," he said, feeding the horse the apple. "She is my best breeding mare. Sweet as can be but fast as lightning when she wants to be." Rose tentatively reached out to stroke Willow's nose, and the horse allowed it, her dark eyes intelligent and calm. "She is beautiful," Rose said softly. "That she is," James agreed. He pointed to a large black stallion standing apart from the others. "That is Thunder. He is the newest addition. Caught him running wild in the foothills about 2 months ago. Still working on earning his trust, but we are getting there." They walked the property for another hour, James pointing out the chicken coop where a dozen hens provided eggs, the small vegetable garden that was currently overgrown with weeds, and the creek that ran along the northern boundary. By the time they returned to the house, Rose's head was spinning with information, but she felt more settled. This place had a peace to it, a simplicity that was a far cry from the tension and drama of her father's house. "I will be back by noon," James said, saddling a sturdy bay gelding. "You have everything you need." "Yes," Rose assured him. "I will start on the house." She watched him ride off toward the distant pastures, and then she turned back to the house with determination. If she was going to stay here, even temporarily, she was going to make herself useful. Rose spent the morning in a whirlwind of cleaning. She washed the dishes, swept the floors, dusted every surface, and even managed to scrub the worst of the stains out of James's clothes that had been piled in a corner. She found sheets and blankets that needed airing and hung them outside in the sunshine. She organized the small pantry and made a mental list of supplies they would need from town. By the time James returned, the house was transformed. He stopped in the doorway and stared around in obvious surprise. "Damn," he said, then immediately looked sheepish. "Sorry, this looks amazing. I forgot what the floor actually looked like." Rose felt a flush of pride. "It is a nice house, it just needed some attention." "You must be exhausted," James said, taking off his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. a peg that Rose had just that morning cleared of cobwebs. "You did not have to do all this in one day." "I wanted to," Rose said honestly. "I needed to feel useful, and it helped keep my mind occupied." James nodded, understanding crossing his face. "Have you thought any more about what happened? About your family?" Rose's good mood dimmed slightly. "I have tried not to, but yes, it has been on my mind. I keep thinking that my father will come looking for me, that he will realize what my stepmother did was wrong. But I know he will not. He chose her over me a long time ago." "I am sorry," James said, and she could tell he meant it. Family should be a source of strength, not pain. "What was your family like?" Rose asked, wanting to change the subject from her own troubles. "You said your parents passed away, but do you have siblings?" "A younger sister," James said, moving to the kitchen to start preparing lunch. Rose joined him, and they worked side by side in an easy rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. "Her name is Sarah. She is married now, lives in Santa Fe with her husband, who is a clerk for a lawyer there. We write letters sometimes, but I have not seen her in about a year. She wanted me to move to the city with her after our parents died, but I could not leave the ranch. This land, these horses, it is all I know." "Do you ever get lonely?" Rose asked, and then immediately wished she could take the question back. It was too personal, too forward. But James did not seem offended. He considered the question as he sliced vegetables for a soup. "Sometimes," he admitted, "it can get quiet out here, especially in the winter. But I have always been more comfortable with animals than people, and I like the work. Keeps me busy." "Have you ever thought about marrying?" Rose asked, and then felt her cheeks burn. Why was she asking him these things? James glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "I have thought about it," he said carefully, "but it never seemed to be the right time or the right person. I did not want to marry just for the sake of not being alone. Wanted it to mean something, you know." Rose did know. It was exactly why she had refused to marry Chester Whitmore, why she was willing to risk everything rather than tie herself to a man she did not love and who did not love her. They ate lunch together, and then Rose insisted on doing the dishes while James went back out to work with Thunder. She watched from the window as he moved around the stallion's corral, his movements patient and steady, never forcing, never threatening. The horse was skittish but curious, and slowly, over the course of an hour, he allowed James to get closer and closer until finally James was able to touch his neck. Rose found herself smiling as she watched. There was something beautiful about the trust being built between man and animal, something that spoke to patience and respect and understanding. It occurred to her that James approached everything in his life the same way he approached his horses. With kindness, with steadiness, with a quiet confidence that made others want to trust him. The days fell into a routine. Rose would wake early and make breakfast while James did the morning feeding and checking of the animals. They would eat together, and then James would go out to work with the horses while Rose managed the house, the garden, and the chickens. She proved to be a capable cook, much better than James, and he praised her meals with such genuine appreciation that she found herself looking forward to his reactions. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. James told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about the wild mustangs he had chased through the mountains, about the time a rattlesnake had spooked his father's horse and nearly killed them both. Rose told him about her childhood before her mother died, about the books she loved to read, about her dreams of seeing the ocean someday, even though she had never been farther east than Las Cruces. 3 weeks passed, and Rose realized with some surprise that she was happy. Despite everything that had happened, despite being cut off from her family and her old life, she felt more content than she had in years. Part of it was the simple satisfaction of honest work, of earning her keep and knowing she was valuable. But if she was honest with herself, a larger part of it was James. She was falling in love with him. It had crept up on her slowly, in the way he always made sure she had the last piece of bread, in the way he had fixed the loose board on the porch steps without her even asking because he was worried she would trip, in the way he listened when she talked like her words actually mattered. He made her laugh with his dry humor, and he made her feel safe in a way she had never felt before. But Rose had no idea if he felt the same way. He was always kind to her, always respectful, but he never crossed any lines. He never touched her inappropriately, never looked at her with anything but friendly warmth. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, but it was always gone before she could analyze it. She was afraid to say anything, afraid to ruin the peace they had built. If he did not feel the same way, it would make everything awkward, and she would lose the one good thing in her life right now. So she kept her feelings to herself and tried to be content with his friendship. Then, on a Sunday morning 4 weeks after Rose had arrived, everything changed. They had gone into town for church, as they did every Sunday to maintain appearances and show that Rose was living a respectable life. The townspeople whispered when they saw her, of course, and her stepmother had spread vicious rumors about Rose being a disobedient and ungrateful daughter who had run off with a man in the night. The fact that Rose was now living at James Mallory's ranch only seemed to confirm the rumors in most people's minds. Never mind that James had a reputation for honesty and decency. Rose had learned to ignore the whispers and the judgmental looks. She held her head high and focused on the sermon, sitting next to James in the back pew as always. After the service, they usually left quickly to avoid confrontation, but today Chester Whitmore was waiting for them outside. "Miss Vaughn," he said, stepping into their path. He was a large man, tall and broad with a thick mustache and those cold gray eyes that had frightened Rose from the start. "I see you have resurfaced. Your father has been quite concerned about you." "I doubt that," Rose said coolly, trying to step around him. James moved closer to her side, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed. "Now, there is no need to be difficult," Chester continued, his voice taking on a hard edge. "You embarrassed me greatly at that dinner. You owe me an apology at the very least." "I owe you nothing," Rose said, her voice steady even though her heart was pounding. "I made my feelings clear. I will not marry you, Mr. Whitmore. Not now, not ever." Chester's face darkened. "You think you have a choice. You are living in sin with this cowboy, ruined in the eyes of everyone in this town. No decent man will have you now. You should be grateful I am still willing to overlook your disgraceful behavior." "Watch yourself, Whitmore," James said, his voice low and dangerous. Rose had never heard him sound like that before. "Rose has made her choice. You need to respect it." "This does not concern you, Mallory," Chester snapped. "This is between me and my future wife." "I am not your future wife," Rose said firmly. "I am not your anything. Please leave me alone." Chester reached out and grabbed Rose's arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "Now you listen to me, girl. Your father accepted my money and made a promise. You are going to honor that promise or I will make sure you regret it." Before Rose could react, James moved. He grabbed Chester's wrist and twisted it away from Rose, stepping between them. "Take your hands off her," James said, his voice like steel, "and do not ever touch her again." Chester yanked his arm free, his face purple with rage. "You are going to regret this, Mallory, both of you. I have influence in this town. I can make your lives very difficult." "Then do it," James said calmly. "But you are not going to force Rose into anything she does not want. Now step aside." For a moment, Rose thought Chester might actually try to hit James. His fists were clenched and his whole body was tense with anger. But they were standing outside the church with the whole congregation watching, and even Chester Whitmore was not bold enough to start a brawl on holy ground. "This is not over," he hissed, and then he turned and stalked away. Rose realized she was shaking. James put a gentle hand on her back, guiding her toward their wagon. "Come on," he said softly. "Let us go home." They rode in silence for the first few miles, Rose trying to process what had just happened. She had known Chester was angry about her rejection, but she had not realized how deep that anger ran. The thought that he still considered her his property, that he thought he could simply take what he wanted, made her feel sick. "Are you all right?" James asked finally, glancing over at her. "I do not know," Rose admitted. "James, what if he tries to cause trouble for you, for the ranch? He is a powerful man." "Let him try," James said. "I am not afraid of Chester Whitmore." "But I do not want you to suffer because of me," Rose said, her voice breaking. "You have been so kind, and I have brought nothing but problems to your door." James pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "Rose, look at me," he said, and she did, meeting his warm brown eyes. "You have not brought problems. You have brought light to a house that was lonely and empty. You have made me laugh more in the past month than I have in years. You have reminded me what it is like to look forward to coming home at the end of the day. If Chester Whitmore wants to make trouble over that, then let him. I would not trade this past month for anything." Rose felt tears spill down her cheeks. "You truly mean that?" "Every word," James said softly. He reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb, and the touch sent shivers through her entire body. "Rose, I need to tell you something. I have been trying to fight it because I did not want to make you uncomfortable or put you in a difficult position. But after what happened today, I cannot keep quiet anymore." Rose's heart was beating so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "What is it?" James took a deep breath. "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the moment I found you on my porch, cold and scared and needing help. You are the bravest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and the thought of you being forced to marry someone like Chester Whitmore makes me want to tear the world apart." He paused, searching her face. "I know I am just a simple horse rancher. I cannot offer you wealth or status or anything fancy, but I can offer you a home and respect and all the love I have to give. If you could ever feel the same way about me, I would consider myself the luckiest man in New Mexico." Rose could not speak. The words she had been longing to hear were almost too much to process. So, instead of speaking, she leaned forward and kissed him. James made a sound of surprise that turned into something else entirely as he kissed her back. His hands came up to cradle her face, gentle but sure, and Rose felt like she was on fire and drowning and flying all at the same time. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more, sweet and passionate and full of all the feelings they had both been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rose laughed with pure joy. "I love you too," she said, her voice breathless. "I have been so afraid to say it, afraid it would ruin everything. But I love you, James Mallory. I love your kindness and your patience and the way you care for your horses and the way you make me feel like I matter." James's smile was radiant. "You do matter. You matter more than anything." He kissed her again, softer this time but no less meaningful. "Marry me, Rose. Not because you have to, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to. Because we love each other and we can build a good life together." "Yes," Rose said, no hesitation at all. "Yes, I will marry you." They sat there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the desert sun warm on their faces and the future stretching bright before them. Rose had never felt so completely, utterly happy. She had lost one family, but she had found something better. She had found love, real and true and built on choice rather than obligation. When they finally made it back to the ranch, they spent the rest of the day making plans. They decided to marry as soon as possible, within the week if they could arrange it. There was no point in waiting, and both of them wanted to be husband and wife in truth, not just in heart. James rode into town the next day to speak with the minister and arrange the ceremony. He returned with the news that they could marry on Saturday, just 5 days away. He also brought fabric that he had purchased from the general store, enough for Rose to make herself a new dress if she wanted. Rose was touched by the gesture and spent the next few days sewing a simple but pretty dress in pale blue. It was not the elaborate wedding gown she had imagined as a girl, but it was made with love, and that made it perfect. On Wednesday, 2 days before the wedding, Rose's father showed up at the ranch. Rose saw him riding up the path and felt her stomach drop. She had not spoken to him since the night he let her stepmother throw her out, and she had no idea what to expect. James came to stand beside her as her father dismounted. "I am right here," he said quietly. "You do not have to talk to him if you do not want to." "No, I need to," Rose said. She stepped out onto the porch, her head held high. "Father." William Vaughn looked older than she remembered, his face drawn and tired. "Rose," he said, his voice uncertain, "I heard you are planning to marry James Mallory." "I am," Rose said. "This Saturday." Her father nodded slowly. "Rose, I came here to apologize. What happened that night, what your stepmother did, it was wrong. I should have stopped her. I should have protected you. I was a coward, and I am sorry." Rose felt tears threaten, but she blinked them back. "Why did you let it happen? Why did you choose her over me?" "I do not know," her father admitted, his voice breaking. "I was afraid of being alone. After your mother died, I felt so lost, and when Beatrice came along, she made me feel needed. But she changed after we married, became controlling and cruel, especially toward you. I told myself it would get better, that you just needed to try harder to get along. I was wrong. I see that now." "I needed you to stand up for me," Rose said, her voice thick with emotion. "I needed you to be my father, but you were not." "I know," William said. "And I do not expect you to forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I am sorry, and that I am glad you found someone who will protect you the way I should have." Rose looked at James, who was watching her with concern and support in his eyes. Then she looked back at her father. "I do not know if I can forgive you right now," she said honestly. "But I appreciate you coming here and saying this. It means something." Her father nodded. "Will you allow me to walk you down the aisle? I do not deserve it, but it would mean everything to me." Rose hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, to make him feel the rejection she had felt. But another part of her, the part that remembered her father before Beatrice, before the weakness and cowardice, wanted to give him this chance. "All right," she said finally. "You can walk me down the aisle. But father, if you want to be part of my life going forward, things have to change. You cannot let Beatrice control you anymore." "She is gone," her father said quietly. "I told her to leave 3 days ago. After I heard the rumors about what she was saying about you, the lies she was spreading, I finally found the courage to stand up to her. She has moved back east to live with her sister. And Rose, I gave Chester Whitmore his money back. I told him the deal was off, and that if he tried to bother you again, he would answer to me." Rose felt something shift in her chest. It was not forgiveness, not entirely, but it was a start. "Thank you," she said softly. Her father left soon after, promising to return on Saturday for the wedding. Rose watched him go, feeling drained but also oddly lighter. She turned to find James watching her carefully. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I think so," Rose said. "It does not fix everything that happened, but it is something." James pulled her into his arms and held her close. "You are incredibly strong, you know that?" Rose leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent of leather and sage. "I do not feel strong. I feel like I have been torn apart and put back together all wrong." "Then I will help you feel whole again," James promised. "Every single day for the rest of our lives." Saturday dawned clear and beautiful, the sky a brilliant blue with just a few wispy clouds. Rose woke early and bathed carefully, using the precious lavender soap she had been saving. She put on her new blue dress and pinned her dark hair up with the few hairpins she owned, leaving a few curls loose around her face. When she emerged from her room, James was waiting in the main room dressed in his best suit, his hair slicked back and his face clean-shaven. He stared at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Rose," he breathed, "you look perfect." "So do you," Rose said, feeling suddenly shy. In just a few hours, this man would be her husband. The thought made her nervous and excited in equal measure. They rode to town together in the wagon, James's hand finding hers and holding tight. The small church was fuller than Rose had expected. Some were there out of genuine goodwill, including a few ranching families who James was friendly with. Others were clearly there out of curiosity, wanting to witness the scandalous marriage of the disgraced Vaughn girl and the horse rancher who had taken her in. Rose did not care about them. All she cared about was James, standing at the altar waiting for her with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. Her father met her at the back of the church, offering his arm. Rose took it, and together they walked down the aisle. When they reached the altar, William placed Rose's hand in James's and stepped back, his eyes wet with tears. The minister, Reverend Collins, was an old man with kind eyes who had known James since he was a boy. He smiled at them both and began the ceremony. Rose barely heard the words. She was too focused on James, on the way he was looking at her like she was his entire world. When it came time for the vows, James's voice was strong and clear. "I, James Mallory, take you, Rose Vaughn, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and stand by your side through all of life's joys and sorrows. From this day forward, you are my heart and my home." Rose had to blink back tears as she repeated her own vows. "I, Rose Vaughn, take you, James Mallory, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and build a life with you based on trust and respect and joy. From this day forward, you are my heart and my home." James slid a simple gold band onto her finger, and Rose did the same for him. The rings had been his parents', James had told her, and wearing his mother's ring made Rose feel connected to a history and a love story that had come before theirs. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Collins said, beaming. "You may kiss your bride." James did not need to be told twice. He pulled Rose into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the point that some of the older ladies in the congregation gasped and tittered. Rose did not care. She kissed her husband back with all the love and happiness in her heart. They held a small reception at the ranch afterward, with James's friends and a few neighbors who had come out to celebrate. There was food and music and dancing, and Rose felt like she was floating through a dream. Her father stayed for a while, talking quietly with James and seeming genuinely pleased for them both. Before he left, he hugged Rose tight and whispered another apology in her ear. Rose hugged him back, and while there was still hurt and healing to be done, she felt like maybe, someday, they might be able to rebuild their relationship. As the sun began to set and the last of the guests departed, James and Rose found themselves alone at last. They stood on the porch watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink, James's arms wrapped around Rose from behind and her head resting against his chest. "Are you happy?" James asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Rose replied honestly. She turned in his arms to face him. "A month and a half ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything, but I did not lose anything. I found everything I ever needed. I found you." "I am the one who found you," James corrected with a gentle smile. "Cold and half drowned on my doorstep. Best thing that ever happened to me." Rose laughed and pulled him down for a kiss. "Take me inside, husband," she whispered against his lips. "I want to start our life together properly." James swept her up into his arms, making her shriek with surprised laughter, and carried her over the threshold into their home. He set her down gently in front of the fire, which was crackling warmly, and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Rose Mallory," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you too, James Mallory," Rose replied. "Now and always." Their wedding night was everything Rose had hoped for and more, tender and passionate and full of love. James treated her like she was precious, something to be cherished and worshipped, and Rose gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, they lay tangled together in James's bed, which was now their bed, and talked until the early hours of the morning. They talked about their dreams for the ranch, about the children they hoped to have someday, about the life they would build together. "I want to expand the horse breeding operation," James said, playing with Rose's hair as she rested her head on his chest. "Maybe get some more thoroughbred stock, really make a name for the ranch. With your help managing the household and finances, I think we could do it." "I would like that," Rose said. "And I want to plant a bigger garden next spring, maybe some flowers too, not just vegetables. I want to make this place beautiful." "It is already beautiful," James said, kissing the top of her head. "You made it that way." Rose smiled and snuggled closer to her husband, feeling safe and loved and completely at peace. She thought about the girl she had been just 6 weeks ago, scared and desperate and locked out in the storm. That girl had thought her life was ending, but she had been wrong. Her life had actually been beginning. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and happiness. True to his word, James expanded the horse operation, and Rose proved to have a natural talent for managing the business side of things. She kept meticulous records of breeding lines and sales, handled correspondence with buyers, and even helped train some of the gentler horses. The ranch began to prosper. James's reputation for quality horses grew, and they were able to save money and make improvements to the property. They built a bigger barn, added on to the house to include a proper parlor, and planted fruit trees that would provide shade and food in years to come. Rose's relationship with her father slowly improved as well. William visited regularly, always bringing small gifts and clearly trying to make amends for his past failures. Rose's half-brothers, now old enough to make their own decisions, also began coming around. They were good boys who had missed their older sister, and Rose found joy in watching them grow up. Chester Whitmore tried to cause trouble a few times in the early months, spreading rumors and attempting to undermine James's business relationships. But James's reputation for honesty and quality work spoke for itself, and eventually Chester gave up and moved his attention to some other poor woman he tried to force into marriage. Through it all, Rose and James's love only grew stronger. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, learned how to work together and support each other through difficult times. They laughed together, worked together, dreamed together. On their first anniversary, James surprised Rose with a beautiful chestnut mare he had been secretly training for months. "She is yours," he said, leading the gentle horse over to where Rose stood in the yard. "I thought it was time you had your own horse. I named her Rosewood, but you can change it if you like." Rose was so touched she cried, and then she insisted James teach her to ride properly. She had ridden in wagons and on gentle horses before, but she wanted to learn to really ride, to feel the wind in her hair and the power of the animal beneath her. James was a patient teacher, and within a few months, Rose could ride almost as well as he could. In the spring of their second year together, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She told James over breakfast one morning, her heart pounding with nervousness and excitement. They had talked about children, wanted them desperately, but the reality of it happening was almost overwhelming. James's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit up with the most radiant joy she had ever seen, and he jumped up from the table so fast he knocked over his chair. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "Rose, we are going to be parents." "We are," Rose confirmed, her own cheeks wet with happy tears. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," James admitted, "but also the happiest I have ever been in my entire life." The pregnancy was not easy. Rose suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and James was incredibly patient and caring, holding her hair back when she was ill and making sure she ate even when she did not want to. As her belly grew, he became almost comically protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy or work too hard, even though Rose felt perfectly capable. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she would tell him with exasperation, but secretly she loved how much he cared. In late October of 1884, after a long and difficult labor, Rose gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Michael William Mallory, after James's father and Rose's father, and the moment Rose held him in her arms, she understood a love she had never imagined possible. James cried when he first held his son, his big hands so gentle as he cradled the tiny infant. "Hello, Michael," he whispered. "I am your papa. I am going to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know. You are the most precious thing in the world." Watching her husband with their son, Rose felt her heart could not possibly hold any more love. But then Michael opened his eyes, dark like his father's, and looked right at her, and she realized her capacity for love was infinite. William Vaughn wept when he met his first grandchild, holding the baby with trembling hands and apologizing over and over for not being a better father to Rose. Rose forgave him then, truly and completely. She could see how much he regretted his past failures, and now that she was a parent herself, she understood how easy it was to make mistakes even when you loved your children more than life itself. Michael was a happy baby who grew into a curious and energetic toddler. He loved the horses and would toddle out to the corrals as soon as he could walk, fearless and fascinated. James spent hours with him, teaching him to be gentle and respectful with the animals, and Michael soaked up every word his father said. 2 years after Michael was born, Rose had a daughter. They named her Catherine Rose Mallory, but she was Katie from the moment she drew breath. Where Michael was bold and outgoing, Katie was thoughtful and quiet, with her mother's dark hair and her father's warm eyes. She preferred the garden to the corrals, and Rose loved teaching her about plants and flowers. The ranch continued to thrive. James's horses were now sought after throughout New Mexico and beyond, and they had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload. Rose managed the household and the children, and still found time to help with the business side of things. They were building something real and lasting, a legacy to pass on to their children. On their 5th anniversary, James took Rose out to the place where he had first brought her after rescuing her from the storm. They stood on the porch where she had collapsed, now just a memory rather than a nightmare. "You ever think about that night?" James asked, his arm around her waist. "All the time," Rose admitted. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had gone a different direction, if I had not found your house. Would I have died out there in the storm? I do not like to think about that, James said, pulling her closer. I am just grateful you found me. Or I found you. However it happened, it was meant to be. I think so too, Rose said. She looked up at her husband, this man who had saved her life in more ways than one. I love you so much, James. Thank you for opening your door that night. Thank you for trusting me enough to stay, James replied, kissing her softly. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rose Mallory. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers that tested the ranch. There were illnesses and injuries and the constant worry that came with being parents. Rose's father passed away when Katie was 4, and Rose grieved even though their relationship had been complicated. James's sister Sarah moved back to New Mexico with her children after her husband died, and the Mallorys welcomed them into their lives and their home. But through all the challenges and changes, Rose and James faced everything together. Their love, which had been born in a storm and forged in hardship, only grew stronger with time. They supported each other, laughed together, raised their children with love and wisdom, and built a life that was full of purpose and joy. Michael grew up to be a fine horseman like his father, and eventually took over much of the ranch operation. He married a sweet school teacher from town, and they gave Rose and James 4 grandchildren who filled the ranch with noise and laughter. Katie became a talented artist who painted beautiful landscapes of the New Mexico desert. She married a gentle doctor and moved to Santa Fe, but she visited often and always said that the ranch would be her true home forever. As Rose and James grew older, they would often sit on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Rose would think back to that frightened, desperate girl who had been locked out in a storm, and she would marvel at how far she had come. "What are you thinking about?" James would ask, and Rose would smile and tell him the truth. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how blessed. That storm brought me to your door, and you opened not just your door but your heart. You gave me everything, James. A home, a family, a life worth living." "You gave me the same," James would always reply. "I was just existing before you came. You taught me what it means to truly live." They grew old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and the horses they both loved. When James passed away at the age of 78, peaceful in his sleep with Rose's hand in his, Rose grieved deeply, but also felt profound gratitude for the 52 years they had shared. She lived another 5 years after James, staying on the ranch that Michael now ran, helping with the grandchildren and tending her garden. She told stories about their life together, about the storm and the rescue and the love that had blossomed from hardship. She made sure everyone knew that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things we could never have imagined. When Rose passed away at the age of 83, surrounded by family in the house that James had made into a home, her last thoughts were of that first night. She remembered the storm, the fear, the desperation. She remembered seeing the light in James's window and stumbling toward it like salvation. She remembered his face when he opened the door, concerned and kind, and she remembered thinking even then that this man was something special. She had been right. James Mallory had been the love of her life, her partner, her best friend, her everything. And it had all started because she had been locked out in a storm and a cowboy had opened his door and his heart. The ranch still stands today, passed down through generations of Mallorys who know the story of how it all began. They tell it to their children and their grandchildren, keeping alive the memory of Rose and James, and the love that built something beautiful out of darkness and storm. The house has been added onto and modernized over the years, but the original structure remains, And on the mantel in the main room sits a photograph of Rose and James on their 25th anniversary, smiling at each other with the kind of love that transcends time and death and becomes something eternal. Below the photograph is a small brass plaque that Michael had made after his parents died. It reads simply, "Here lived Rose and James Mallory, who proved that the greatest love stories often begin in the darkest storms. May their legacy of kindness, courage, and devotion inspire all who follow." And indeed it does. The story of the girl locked out in the storm and the cowboy who saved her is told throughout New Mexico, passed from generation to generation, as a reminder that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to exactly where we are meant to be. That love can bloom in the most unexpected places, between two people who were brave enough to open their hearts to possibility. Rose and James Mallory's love story became legend, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was real. Two ordinary people who found each other in a moment of crisis and chose, every single day for the rest of their lives, to love each other with everything they had. They built a home, raised a family, created a legacy that lasted long after they were gone. They proved that the best kind of love is not the kind that comes easily, but the kind that is forged in difficulty and strengthened by time and choice and unwavering commitment. Their story is a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of second chances, and the truth that home is not a place but a person. For Rose, home was James, the cowboy who saw a woman in need and offered not just shelter but everything he had to give. For James, home was Rose, the brave woman who stumbled into his life and taught him what it meant to love completely. In the end, that is what their story is about. Not just survival or rescue or even romance, but the profound and beautiful truth that sometimes, when we are at our lowest, when we have lost everything and see no way forward, life sends us exactly what we need. Sometimes it comes in the form of a light in the darkness, a door opening in a storm, and a hand reaching out to pull us to safety. Rose and James Mallory found that in each other, and in doing so, they found everything. They found love, they found home, they found purpose and joy and a lifetime of happiness. All because one terrible night in April of 1883, a girl was locked out in a storm and a cowboy opened his door and his heart, and neither of them was ever the same again. Their love was the kind that poets write about and dreamers dream of, but it was also real and tangible and built on a foundation of everyday choices and small kindnesses. It was morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, and hands held across the dinner table. It was patience during hard times and celebration during good times. It was raising children together and building a business together and growing old together with grace and gratitude. Most of all, it was choosing each other, over and over again, through everything life threw at them. That choice, made fresh each day, was what transformed a moment of crisis into a lifetime of love. It was what turned a simple act of opening a door into the beginning of a beautiful story that would inspire generations to come. And so the legacy lives on, in the ranch that still stands, in the family that still gathers there, in the stories still told around dinner tables and fireplaces. The legacy of Rose Vaughn Mallory and James Mallory, who proved that love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but about seeing someone in their darkest moment and choosing to be their light. About opening not just your door, but your heart, and letting someone in completely. Their story reminds us all that we never know when our life is about to change forever. We never know when the worst night of our lives might actually be the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to us. We never know when a stranger might become the love of our life, or when a moment of compassion might alter the course of our destiny. But what we can know, What Rose and James taught through their example is that love is always worth the risk. That opening our hearts, even when we are scared, even when we have been hurt before, is how we find true happiness. That the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the storm is necessary to bring us home. Rose and James Mallory lived that truth every single day of their lives together. They embodied it, celebrated it, and passed it on to everyone they touched. And though they are long gone now, their love remains, immortal and inspiring, a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever felt lost in a storm and wondered if they would ever find their way home. The answer, as Rose and James proved, is yes. Home is out there, waiting. Sometimes all we need is the courage to keep walking through the storm until we see the light, and the faith to knock on the door when we find it. And if we are very lucky, someone like James will be on the other side, ready to open not just his door but his entire heart, ready to offer not just shelter but a lifetime of love. That is the legacy of Rose and James Mallory. That is the story that began on a stormy April night in 1883 in Deming, New Mexico, when a girl was locked out by her family and a cowboy gave her everything. It is a story of redemption and second chances, of courage and compassion, of love that conquers all. It is a story that proves once and for all that the best love stories are not the ones that are easy, but the ones that are worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth building a life on. And it is a story that, decades after Rose and James have passed on, continues to remind us all of the most important truth of all. That love, real and true and lasting love, begins with a simple choice. The choice to open your heart to another person, to see them in their need and offer them your hand, to build something together that is greater than either of you could create alone. James made that choice when he opened his door to Rose. Rose made that choice when she chose to stay and build a life with him. And they made that choice, over and over again, for more than 50 years, until it became not just a choice but the very fabric of who they were. Two souls who found each other in the storm and decided to weather every storm together from that moment on. Two hearts that beat as one, from that first night until their last breath, and beyond into eternity. That is the story of Rose and James Mallory, the girl locked out in a storm, and the cowboy who opened his door and his heart. It is a story that proves love is real, that happy endings exist, and that sometimes the very thing we think will destroy us is actually the thing that leads us to exactly where we are meant to be. And it is a story that will never be forgotten, passed down through the generations. A testament to the enduring power of love and the beauty of two people who found each other against all odds and built something extraordinary together. A love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, forged in hardship, and lasting forever in the hearts of all who hear it.